Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for October 2nd, 2017. Today in the news, we'll be looking at a Men in Black spinoff. DC Cinematic Universe is changing course. We're going to be taking a look at a bunch of reboots, including Charlie's Angels, Flight of the Navigator. The Nice Guys is getting a female-driven TV reboot. And in our feature presentation, Jacob Hall returns to talk about the films he saw in the second half of Fantastic Fest 2017. With me on today's show are Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's up?
And Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
How's it going, guys? We're recording this on Friday afternoon. Are you ready for the weekend?
Oh, yeah.
Working for the weekend.
Yes. And by the way, it's Ben's birthday, so happy birthday, Ben.
Hey, thank you.
Are you guys doing anything exciting over the weekend?
I'm going to the Magic Castle with you tonight.
Yes.
And so I'll probably talk about that in my water cooler next week, so stay tuned.
HT, any plans?
I'm going to New York again this weekend for a birthday party for my uncle.
Nice.
Very cool. Okay, let's get into the news because this is a jam-packed edition of Slash Film Daily. Let's start off with the Men in Black spinoff that is actually happening. It's going to arrive in summer 2019. HT, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
So Sony is expanding its Men in Black universe with a spin-off film without original stars Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones on the screen. So this is going to be a spin-off film developed by Sony Pictures with Iron Man and Transformers: The Last Night screenwriters Matt Holloway and Art Markham penning the script. We don't know much about the film, except that they are aiming for a May 17th, 2019 release date. They have not nailed down a director yet. They are currently in talks with top directors, as they say in the report from Deadline.
Yeah, and they're saying they want almost like a reboot of the franchise, kind of like Jurassic World rebooted Jurassic Park. And obviously this won't involve the same people coming back. What do you guys think of this, Ben? Do we need a Men in Black spinoff?
So this is something that's been talked about a lot before, and they were previously talking about doing a Men in Black and 21 Jump Street crossover. Apparently that's still sort of on the back burner. It's still, that idea has not been officially killed yet. But
by the way, that idea sounds so horrible, but so promising. Do you know what I mean?
Sounds so bad it's good.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, totally. And I think I would rather see that than just a straight spinoff. But it seems like they are maybe potentially easing into getting a little crazier with that world. And I think the Jurassic World comparison is probably apt here, where they're going to try to do something and then maybe in a sequel bring back, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones and some of the other people who have shown up previously in the franchise. I would not be surprised if they lured them back in if this spinoff is successful.
So more Jurassic World than Ghostbusters. HT, you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, as long as they don't deal with time travel again, I'm fine with it. I think that the success of the Men in Black franchise rode heavily on Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones' shoulders, so I don't know how a spinoff will take off, but if they're trying to go for a world-expanding Jurassic World, new generation type of movie, who knows? It's still a big-name franchise, and people will still probably go to theaters to go see it, so they can do what they want, really.
I think the big question for me is Will Smith's epic Men in Black song going to be the theme song for this? And if it is, who is going to be the pop star of this generation that's going to reboot that?
Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber?
Oh, God.
Okay, I don't need this Men in Black spinoff. Okay, let's move from Men in Black to the DC Cinematic Extended Universe, which is not even a thing. More on that in a second. It seems like the DC Entertainment is taking kind of a course correction with the future of not just the cinematic universe, but what they're doing. And Ben, you wrote in a whole article on slashfilm.com about this. What do we know?
Yes, Vulture wrote a big sort of deep dive profile history into DC Entertainment, the company that has teamed up with Warner Brothers to make all of these DC superhero movies. And apparently in the wake of Wonder Woman, the DC Entertainment has adopted a new strategy, and they are rethinking their concept of a connected cinematic universe. Diane Nelson, who's the president of DC Entertainment, said, quote, Our intention, certainly moving forward, is using the continuity to help make sure nothing is diverging in a way that doesn't make sense, but there's no insistence upon an overall storyline or interconnectivity in that universe. So that quote is a little confusing to me, and it sort of makes this whole situation a little bit more confusing to realize that the term DC Extended Universe apparently originated as a joke from an Entertainment Weekly reporter and has since taken on a life of its own, and we all have been using this term as if it's an official thing for 2 years at this point. And in this Vulture article, the reporter learned that nobody internally at DC or Warner Brothers knew where that name came from, or even refers to any of their DC properties using that name or that nickname. So that's a really bizarre thing, and I wrote up an article on Flash Film that you can read about the history of that and how that whole thing sort of came to be. But as far as the actual strategy of DC, they are going to be, and we've talked about this before, they're going to be creating a new side label that basically houses movies that completely stand alone from any other narrative connection to any other DC movies. So the example we've been using is the Joker origin story film that Todd Phillips is supposed to be directing. So that one is going to be a different Joker, not Jared Leto. But Diane Nelson's comments here seem to indicate that even the movies that are in the, I don't know what you wouldn't want to call these terms, but in the sort of saga Justice League timeline kind of thing, don't necessarily have to be as connected as we once thought. So, Peter, what do you think about this?
It's weird because there's some quotes in there, I think one from Jeff Johns, and it seems like one of the lessons they took from Wonder Woman is that people don't want a connected cinematic universe. They want standalone movies. And that to me sounds stupid. I mean, people obviously love the Marvel films, which are very connected. They love Star Wars, which are very connected. I think what people didn't like is, it being forced, the forced connections of Batman vs. Superman. They like it when it actually makes sense and feels organic. And, I mean, I'm not against them doing standalone movies. Obviously, like Star Wars is doing that. But it just seems like some of the observations that some of the lessons that they learned from Wonder Woman aren't the lessons I would have learned from Wonder Woman.
HT, what do you think?
I think that we are constantly hearing news about how DC is course correcting, and it's funny to me what Peter was saying about how what the Warner Brothers executives learned from Wonder Woman was, the standalone story is the strong appeal of that film. And they say it like it's this big revelation that people come for the story and the characters. And I think it's funny because, that's what Marvel films have been doing for a while. That's what the Star Wars films have been doing. They're not just dependent on the crossover or the shoehorned in nods to other movies. It's a standalone movie first, and then it's part of a larger universe. And I think it's really funny that they're just learning that lesson now. So, this story to me it's fascinating, the thinking behind the Warner Brothers executives and everything, just because it seems like they're coming on really late to these ideas that have been in the works with Marvel or with other more successful cinematic universes.
And you're so right about you saying that, we've heard a lot of them course correcting. It feels like they've been course correcting since, Man of Steel came out. It seems like they haven't had a specific kind of outline of where they're going. It seems like it constantly be changing and constantly being evolving based on what they think audiences want. And
one last point to bring up is that apparently Jeff Johns and Diane Nelson, who are sort of leading DC Entertainment, they, I guess, did not have very much control over the movie side of the equation. They've been doing great things in TV and video games and comics and stuff like that in the past few years, but they've only recently sort of gained full creative control over the DC films. So Wonder Woman is sort of their first movie where you can sort of feel their particular fingerprints on it. So hopefully that's a good sign for the stuff that we have coming up in the pipeline, including Justice League and Aquaman and whatever the hell else they decide to do in the years to come.
For sure. Moving on from that to a bunch of reboots, let's talk about this Charlie's Angels reboot. HT, you wrote the article for the site. Who are they looking at?
So the Charlie's Angels reboot, which Elizabeth Banks is helming, this is going to be her second feature film as a director. Her first debut as a director was Pitch Perfect 2. And she's been attached to this movie for a while now. And the movie is reportedly eyeing Kristen Stewart and Lupita Nyong'o for the lead roles. We don't have word about what the third lead role would be, but it apparently is a lot of big names. The biggest, of course, being Stewart and Nyong'o, who are incredibly talented, very unique picks, I think, for this franchise, which has always been sort of a campy action comedy series and now might take on a different veneer now that we have indie darling Kristen Stewart and Academy Award winning actress Lupita Nyong'o.
I think part of the appeal of the Charlie's Angels movies is that they're fun, and I like Kristen Stewart as an actress, but she kind of is better in the kind of dramatic roles, I think. I don't think of her playing kind of a spunky, fun, character. And I'm actually a big fan of the first McG Charlie's Angel reboot, which was written by John August. That opening sequence, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but it takes place in a plane, and it's all in one shot, one single Steadicam take, is so much fun. So, I mean, I'm excited for some more Charlie's Angels. I actually was interested to see it as the TV show when it was rebooted a couple years back, but that was pretty horrible. Ben, what do you think?
So, yeah, I mean, Kristen Stewart and Lupita Nyong'o are certainly a far cry from Drew Barrymore and Cameron Diaz and Lucy Liu as far as, the bubbly personalities. So I'm very fascinated to see what Elizabeth Banks has in mind for this. Stewart, as an actress, tends to work really well with auteur directors and people who have very specific visions for the kinds of movies that they want to make. And Banks seems like the most populist filmmaker that she's potentially will be working with at this point in her career. So, I'm very sort of intrigued to see what that combination looks like on screen, assuming all of these deals actually get signed.
And we should also mention that Elizabeth Banks, who I love as an actress, the only film I've seen her direct is Pitch Perfect 2, and I loved the first Pitch Perfect. I was so disappointed by the sequel.
I did not like Pitch Perfect 2 either.
Oh, man, you guys, I thought Pitch Perfect 2 was better than the first one, so I'm the lone voice of dissent there. But.
Whoa. Okay, let's move on to another reboot. And this one is something that definitely hits my nostalgia. It's definitely, I grew up watching and rewatching on VHS the Disney movie Flight of the Navigator. I've been looking forward to them potentially rebooting this. They've been trying to get it off the ground for the last 10 years. Colin Trevorrow was involved, and now we have a new person involved, and Disney isn't involved anymore, right?
Yes.
Tell us about it, Ben.
Yeah, so Lucifer showrunner Joe Henderson is going to be writing a new script for a Flight of the Navigator reboot, which is different than, I guess, the Flight of the Navigator remake that they've been talking about doing with Disney for a long time. Now, I think it's Lionsgate and the Henson Company have the rights to this property. So it's weird because Disney, for the longest time, I think since 2009, has been talking about just doing a straight-up remake of this movie. But the term reboot from this article that we wrote about sort of makes it seem like they're either going to change the story a little bit and sort of keep the basic concept intact, or maybe turn it into one of these legacy sequels where, it actually continues the story while doing a similar kind of thing. Maybe even bringing back, I think his name was Joey Kramer, who played the 12-year-old protagonist of the 1986 movie. So,
they better bring back Pee Wee Herman as the voice of whatever the alien on the ship.
Yeah, and the Henson Company's involvement is probably promising for people who were fearing that a modern remake or a modern take on this might shave off a lot of the charismatic edges of the original, because with like too much CG or whatever. So the Henson Company, obviously, that comes hand in hand with practical effects and stuff like that. So I don't know. We're still not sure about who's going to direct this. But the idea of a Flight of the Navigator reboot is something that's been kicking around Hollywood for almost a decade at this point. So I'm sort of surprised we haven't seen it by now. But maybe this is the version that finally gets it off the ground.
Also in the news, they are rebooting Shane Black's The Nice Guys as a female-driven TV series without Shane Black involved? I don't understand this at all. HT, you wrote this story for SlashFilm.com and you had the WTF header, which, yes, WTF.
Yeah, this is an odd choice for a reboot, mostly because The Nice Guys was a moderately well-reviewed film that had a pretty terrible box office haul, and it came out only last year. It starred Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe, and it was directed by Shane Black, and it was a very enjoyable noir comedy with a sort of black comedy going on for it, and apparently, Fox has picked up a gender-bent version of The Nice Guys called The Nice Girls. It's going to be written by Michael Diliberti, who wrote 30 Minutes or Less, and it will be a contemporary take on the feature film. So I'm guessing that means it will take place in modern day and not in the 1970s like The Nice Guys took place. So it seems mostly just inspired by the film, less than an actual reboot. So it's very...
let's get this straight. Okay, so the movie, which I liked a lot, is good because of the Shane Black style, comedy and his not just like the dialogue, but his just the style and visuals, and it's set in like that kind of 1970s gritty kind of LA. So if you take out Shane Black and you take out the 1970s, what makes this different than like Lethal Weapon, the TV show?
I'm guessing they just didn't want to make another Lethal Weapon reboot, and we're just like, let's call it The Nice Girls and base it off this other Shane Black buddy comedy feature film that came out recently and has sort of the trappings of this story, but is still completely different. I don't know. It seems very strange. I don't know why they just won't make an original series that is female centric and will try to gender bend this particular story, which I will admit had a lot of casual misogyny kind of going throughout the film. It kind of contributed to the whole lewd 1970s gritty neo-noir thing going on. And
I'm not even sure how you adapt that to what is the female-driven version of that?
So the thing that I can think of off the top of my head is maybe Ryan Gosling's character's daughter is a grown-up protagonist of this, and she's a PI at this point, and that would explain the modern setting, because she was sort of like a young PI in training, kind of in the first movie, or in the only movie, the movie. So I don't know. It's definitely a strange choice. And I bring up Lethal Weapon. It's like, if anybody's watched the Lethal Weapon show on Fox, the miles of difference there are between that and Shane Black's sort of rat-a-tat R-rated movie. So this is a weird choice.
Yeah, I think other than Limitless, this is the first time I've seen a feature film be rebooted into a television version so soon. I don't think there's been another one like this. It's just an odd choice.
Yeah, especially for a movie that didn't really make that much money at the box office. It's not like you're really banking on name recognition or anything, because the movie didn't do that well. I don't know. It's weird.
It's almost like Hollywood is so afraid of original ideas that they're willing to bank on reboots of things that didn't do well versus the original ideas, because maybe someone has some name recognition of The Nice Guys, even though it didn't do that well. Speaking of movies not doing that well, the Flatliners remake hits theaters this weekend, and so far it has 0 positive reviews. You wrote the article for SlashFilm.com. What do we know, Ben?
Yes, the Flatliners movie, which a lot of people are even surprised is out this week because it has gotten so little attention as far as like trailers and TV spots and stuff like that, has sort of limped into theaters. It has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes as of this recording. It should be noted that there are only 12 reviews in at this point, which is a pretty small number, but they decided not to screen this movie for critics at all. So the people who have reviewed it are the people who woke up this morning or went and saw a late show last night or something and paid to see it. So that could contribute a little bit maybe to the film's sort of overall negative reviews that it has at this moment. But I think for the most part, people are saying this is a pretty bad, sort of flatly executed, boring, bland take on this story. So it's a remake, or actually, it's not even really a remake. It's weird. It's like it's a spiritual remake, but it's technically a sequel because Kiefer Sutherland's character from the 1990 original movie shows up in the new movie, I guess. So, but it basically tells the same story of a group of medical students who essentially kill themselves temporarily and then bring themselves back to life just to experience the high of being on the other side. So I guess it's just it had a $20 million budget, but it's not expected to do very well, and these reviews are not going to help it.
I guess the question is, how many of these reviews and how many of the box office reports are going to use a flat pun in their headlines? Flatliners falls flat.
So many.
Yes. Well, that does it for the news. Before we get into the feature presentation, I got to leave you guys here. You can find more of Ben at Ben Pears on Twitter. You can find more HT at HTran Buoy on Twitter and the Millennial Falcon podcast. And now for our feature presentation, we're bringing on Jacob Hall to talk about the second half of Fantastic Fest 2017. How's it going, Jacob?
I am a very tired person, Peter. It's been a really, really good film festival. I know we've discussed the controversies on the site before. We wrote about it at length recently in a statement we can link to in the show notes. But even if you are able to look past all that, this is the strongest lineup this festival's had in years, and it's been wild. I've had a great time in terms of purely watching movies.
And you've been moving at the same time, which is I don't know how you pulled that off.
Yes, I am. I'm recording you from a mostly empty kitchen. I'm sleeping on the floor tonight due to a weird moving scheduling error. It's been weird. It's been quite a ride.
Okay, so let's get into it. What is the best movie you saw in the second half of Fantastic Fest?
Oh, in the second half, that would probably be. It's tossed up between two movies that couldn't be more different. So I'll go ahead and start with Mike Flanagan's Gerald's Game. It's a Stephen King adaptation of a 1992 novel. And by the time you listen to this, you may have already seen it because it hits Netflix on Friday, September 29th. It is a Netflix original movie made by the streaming service for the streaming service. And for years, it's a book that many King fans thought was unadaptable because the basic plot is that a woman named Jessie is handcuffed to a bed by her husband during a weekend getaway. Things go wrong, the husband dies, and the entire book is her handcuffed to a bed dealing with inner and possibly outer demons that threaten her in some way. And it's Mike Flanagan, who co-wrote and directed it, he's a director I've liked for a long time. He directed Oculus, Hush, another Netflix horror movie, the shockingly good Ouija Origin of Evil, the really good sequel to the really bad Ouija movie. And this is a really strong movie, Peter. He gets around the one-room location by having Jessie's played by Carla Gugino, you may remember from Sin City, amongst other things, and her husband's played by Bruce Greenwood. And they get around the psychological internal nature of the book by having both Carla Gugino play a version of herself who appears to her as a vision. So she's talking to herself and to a vision of her husband, played by Bruce Greenwood. So we're essentially acting as parts of her subconscious as she tries to figure out how to get out of this increasingly horrible situation. And I'm really glad Netflix made this because I feel like other studios would have balked at a movie that's set in one bedroom and the entire plot device is hinged on a woman being handcuffed to a bed as she tries to escape. But it's such an audience movie. So see this one with friends. There's a scene that had the audience screaming and like crawling into their seats. It would, if you've read the book, you probably know the moment I'm talking about. And it's just this, it's this incredible horror movie. It is scary, it's intense, but it's also really moving and has this surprisingly big heart. And it occasionally falters, I think, maybe in the home stretch where it tries to lay it on a little thick with trying to drive home thematic points. But it's ultimately about women and the victims who rise up to face their abusers and overcome the monsters in their lives, both literal ones and the ones that have been buried deep down in their psyches. And considering all of the controversies that have plagued Fantastic Fest this year, I felt like the audiences found it like a relief to watch. Like, this is a movie that we needed right now, a unpleasant, nasty genre movie, which is pure Fantastic Fest, but also one that was all about how powerful a woman can be when faced with abuse. And it's a really good movie. And if you haven't checked it out on Netflix yet, by the time you listen to this, it's worth your time.
So, Dark Tower and Mist Be Damned, the King Assance is in full effect.
Yes, and Gerald's Game has a Dark Tower reference, Peter. It has a Dark Tower reference and a Dolores Claiborne reference. It maintains all the Stephen King connected universes stuff that from the book, and it does it better than Dark Tower did. It's kind of insane.
So what else did you see at Fantastic Fest that you really liked?
The other movie I loved, and our own Chris Evangelista saw this and reviewed it from the Toronto International Film Festival, is Armando Iannucci's The Death of Stalin. And you may remember Armando Iannucci because he created the TV show The Thick of It, its spiritual sequel movie In the Loop, which is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. And more recently, he was showrunner and creator on the first 4 seasons of HBO's Veep. And he left and made this movie, and it's very much his traditional style, very coarse dialogue, very coarse, very funny dialogue, very political satire. Much of the humor comes from people saying horrible things to each other and saying it very quickly, and there's a certain amount of shock value in his dialogue. But while his previous work has been often about how can we get the biggest laughs just out of people being horrible to each other, Death of Stalin, as the title implies, takes place in 1953 in the Soviet Union, where Joseph Stalin has just died, and it's about his inner circle all grasping for power in his wake. And what's kind of insane about it, and he talked about this a little bit in the Q&A after the movie, is how much of it is actually true to life, how much of the research they did, the movie realized that, we don't need to make this funny or add comedy because this was so ridiculous. We can just kind of portray it as is in many cases. And it's even more ridiculous because you have actors like Jason Isaacs, Steve Buscemi, Jeffrey Tambor, all these British and American actors using their natural accents but playing Russian characters. That doesn't mean, even though the costumes and location are Russian, it doesn't even bother to do accents. It kind of adds to the absurdity of it. But since things are genuinely horrible in this time in this corner of the world, the movie doesn't shy away from the brutality of it. It's a very dark comedy in that it deals with genocide, deals with mass arrests and mass torture and mass executions. But it is, the characters who are doing this are so petty and evil and stupid, and it feels, the whole point of the movie feels like here is what happens when really dumb, really evil people are allowed to take power in a country, and I feel like it's arriving at just the right time for a lot of people.
What else did you see at the festival that you really loved?
Okay. Well, and I'll go a little more quickly in this next few. I saw 1922, which is another Stephen King Netflix adaptation. Directed. Yeah.
How many Stephen King things did you see at Fantastic Fest?
Just the two, just Gerald's Game, 1922. 1922 isn't quite as good as Gerald's Game. It's based on a Stephen King novella, about 123-page novella from his novel Full Dark, No Stars. And it's a very straightforward gothic horror story. You kind of get like an Edgar Allan Poe vibe from it. Less of a gnarly in-your-face experience than it or even Gerald's Game. But it's about a farmer played by Thomas Jane doing this great weird performance, really great old school, like long lost Nebraska accent as a farmer who murders his wife and discovers that like this sets up a chain reaction of events, that tears his life apart over the course of 1922, hence the title of the movie. And it's a very good movie. It's not necessarily scary or violent or it's not going to like have you jumping out of your seat like a lot of Stephen King movies are. But it's a really solid, moody, well-crafted, well-acted drama that's just unsettling enough to give you some good horror vibes. But it actually is a nice palate cleanser after it and after Gerald's Game. It definitely feels like, oh, this is Stephen King movies can be so much more because they're not just horror stories. This is far more to the Shawshank Stand By Me side of things, even though there is some spooky stuff in it.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder of the Stephen King Renaissance is going to hopefully be so much bigger and more interesting than just a good horror movie every so often.
I'm calling it the King-assance. And it also seems like Fantastic Fest this year had a lot of promotion for upcoming Netflix releases. It seemed like there was a heavy amount of them. Yeah,
there was Gerald's Game, off the top of my head, Gerald's Game, 1922, and Wheelman are the three ones that I saw. I can't remember if there are any others, but I know that Netflix is sometimes cagey with giving their films at festivals because I feel like their response seems to be people are going to watch it on Netflix anyway, so why should we risk bad buzz giving over to a festival? But all three of those movies played really well with the Fantastic Fest audiences. People seem to really dig all three of them. And it made me wish that people could see these movies on the big screen, which is not always an option with Netflix movies.
It does seem weird that, they have Duncan Jones' next movie, Mute, and I feel like Fantastic Fest would have been the best place to premiere that movie. But we still don't know when that's coming out, I don't think.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe next year we'll get to see it. Who knows when that's coming out? I want to give a quick shout out to two documentaries. Haunters, The Art of the Scare. It is a documentary directed by John Schnitzner about professional haunted house operators, focusing on a few key figures, including a guy who runs an extreme haunted house, requires a waiver, a professional scare actress who's dedicated her entire life to acting in haunted houses and has suffered serious injuries due to her craft. And it's not a great doc, but if the subject matter interests you, it is fascinating. It's very good. I interviewed the director, and that will go up next week on the site because the movie's going to VOD next week. And he says he would love to do an entire TV series where each episode focuses on a different American haunted house attraction. And if this sounds appealing to you at all, it is worth checking out. Like if you have no interest in haunted houses, you're the kind of person who doesn't get into the Halloween spirit every October, you can skip it. But if this is the kind of thing that appeals to you in any way, it's a really good movie. And the other documentary, and I know I'm shutting this one up because I know
and
that.
By the way, this is a film that it sounds like something I want to see. There was a movie released by one of the Alamo Drafthouse guys, The American Scream. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, The American Scream. I like American Scream a lot, and they're actually good companion pieces because Haunters is about guys who are mostly about people who are operating the big leagues, kind of people who make haunted houses that work for haunted houses that are controversial or get headlines or are more well known. Whereas American Scream was about people literally making haunted houses in their backyards as passion projects, and they're hoping maybe one day be able to make it their full-time occupation. So,
yeah. And I remember really liking that movie. It's from the guy that did Best Worst Movie, Michael Paul Stevenson, and I think it's produced by Zach Carlson, who used to program movies at the Draft House. And I really love that movie, and I'm a big fan. I've become a big fan of these haunted houses since moving to LA and doing Halloween Horror Nights, and now I've done Not Scary Farm, and I'm still working on this piece for the site that's going to compare all of them. But I've never been to any of these independent ones, and I'm excited to see this movie.
Yeah, and I think Universal and Not Scary Farm will get referenced in the movie. It's interesting interviewing the director. I was fascinated by the interview, and I hope you guys enjoy it when that goes up, because his original cut was 4.5 hours long. And it went into like every single major American haunted house you can get into, including Universal. But when he showed it to people who weren't haunted house fans, they got bored and said, focus on these three characters. So the final cut, which is made for people who may not be haunted house fans, is more about the most interesting people as opposed to the entire look at the entire industry. But that cut does exist. It actually is out there. So maybe one day we'll get to see that.
So what else did you see that you liked?
Oh yeah, the second doc I wanted to mention. I want to mention this because I think that our own Brad Oman is excited for it. I think he'd really dig it. And this is Neil Berkeley's Gilbert. It is a documentary about Gilbert Gottfried, the comedian. He's probably best known to people these days for being the voice of Iago in Aladdin, but he's had a stand-up career going back decades.
And he was also the voice of that, what was it, the Affleck duck.
Yep,
yeah.
And which was an example of a early social media pile-on. He lost that job. It's something that is chronicled in the movie, and I don't want to say too much. But he's very famous for his on-stage persona, which is very abrasive, very loud, very crude. And what's great about this documentary is that it takes us into his day-to-day life in a way that makes you understand how he functions as a real person, like how much of his incredibly loud trademark voices and exaggeration. He doesn't talk like that all the time. You use a lot of time spent with his wife, who is this lovely woman. You have great chemistry. You understand the relationship, and so much of the fun of the movie is understanding how they deal with each other's quirks and how to make each other better people. It's really one of the healthiest depictions of marriage I saw at a genre film festival this week. It's a really sweet, really nice movie, and Gilbert Gottfried was there for the Q&A, and he seemed both proud of and embarrassed by the movie, and I get that reaction because you watch it and you feel like, oh, I get who this guy is, but it also really gets under his skin and really lets you see like who is the kind of guy who go on stage and tell the jokes he does. It's the kind of person who's so sensitive and so easily wounded by life that he needs to be crude in order to have a defense mechanism against things that cause him pain. And it's really lovely and just a genuine portrait of someone who I didn't know I'd be so interested in learning more about. And I'm not sure about the release date. Maybe we can add that to the show notes. But it is coming. It is going to be available in the next few months, I believe. And it's, even if you're not a Gilbert Gottfried fan, if you're a comedy fan or even a fan of good docs, it's a good one.
Yeah, there's a couple other docs that feature Gilbert Gottfried that I would highly recommend if you haven't seen. The first being one produced by Penn Jillette, one half of Penn and Teller, called The Aristocrats, about the dirtiest joke in stand-up comedy history. And he famously he's kind of the inciting incident for that movie. And there was a movie a couple of years ago at Sundance. It was one of my favorite movies of the year, and that movie's Life Animated, about this kid with autism that basically learns to communicate and live life through his love of Disney movies, and Gilbert Gottfried is a part of that, and he's great in it.
I guess the last movie I want to mention, this is actually from day 2 of the fest, but I forgot to mention it during our first podcast about Fantastic Fest this year. Yeah. And I really want to talk about it because it's probably my second or third favorite movie of the festival is Thelma. It's a Norwegian film by Joachim Trier. It's actually Norway's submission for the Academy Awards this year, and I would love to see it get a nomination because it's great. And it is essentially about a young woman who goes to college, played by Ellie Harbo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And as she gets away from her religious family and starts being able to meet new people and experiment with new lifestyles, you start realizing that she has unique powers. She has reality-altering powers in some way, and they're triggered by all kinds of things, but most notably by her discovering her sexual feelings for another woman. And so it's essentially, if Carrie was a Norwegian art house movie, it would probably look like this, but it's in a festival that was full of really great LGBTQ movies. I wrote about this on Twitter. I'm hoping to write about a little more on my festival wrap-up post next week. It is a genuinely powerful and no-holds-barred depiction of how coming out can tear a family apart, especially a religious family, and how a young person has to deal with the consequences of, do I pick my family or my feelings? He does it with a girl with psychic powers and all kinds of horrifying imagery. But it's a really good, beautifully acted, and intense Norwegian movie that just so happens to have psychic powers in it, and I'm hoping people discover it.
bunch of movies to add to your wish list, your list of movies to look out for, and Jacob will have, after he's done moving, he will have a whole list of his favorite films up at slashfilm.com, and we'll link
I will,
to that.
and I will give you a tease about that. The movie I talked about last time, Joseph Kahn's Bodied, is still my favorite film in the festival. And it won the Audience Award today, which is the award when everybody leaves the theater, they vote on a ballot saying, like, give a movie a 1 through a 10. And it won, and this is the second Audience Award it's won. It also won the Audience Award at Toronto a few weeks ago. So that's 2 Audience Awards for this movie, but no distributor yet. And Joseph Kahn was on Twitter saying that the studios are simply, they claimed that there's no audience for it, and nobody's going to want to see it. And he's saying that 2 Audience Awards later, it's becoming clear that the studios are just kind of scared by this movie because it is in your face and offensive and brutally honest. But also, as I think these 2 awards show, really funny and really crowd pleasing and going to get people talking in the right ways. So of all the movies I've mentioned, that's the one that most of the movies I've mentioned you'll be able to see. Everything I've talked about today and the other day are things that come to theaters in some capacity. Bodied is not, and I don't know.
I just wonder why something like Netflix wouldn't be interested in a movie like that.
It's a really good question, and it comes back down to the issue of I would love it to be an audience movie for people. Seeing it with the crowd was one of the great film experiences of my life, Peter. The crowd was so into it. People were cheering and laughing and gasping and got a standing ovation at the end. I would have fun watching it at home again, and I hope if Netflix or Amazon or if that's what it takes to get people to see it, that's great. But it's like a experience I'm going to treasure. I'm never going to forget when I saw Bodied for the first time. So it's always that weird issue where, like, yeah, I'm one of the very few people who ever got to see Gerald's Game in a theater, and you'll be able to watch it at home and enjoy it. But I kind of wish people could share in that movie's most incredible moments, and Bodied is all incredible moments. So yeah.
And it should be noted that Netflix isn't against doing films in theaters. They're against doing it, of having a release window. They want to do day and date, and unfortunately a lot of the multiplexes don't see any value in that.
Yeah. To be fair. So my whole thing is that if you are in a situation where you can see Bodied with another film festival or when it gets distribution and it's available, I can't recommend seeing another movie this year more. I think maybe only Get Out is the movie I've loved as much this year. And I think I love them both because they're both incredibly fearless Molotov cocktails of movies that, like, I feel like they're thrown into the room and they're here to antagonize you and ask questions and push you around and talk about all the things that nobody wants to talk about, and they do it while being incredibly entertaining.
For sure. Jacob, where can we find more of your work online?
Starting back on Monday, I am back on slashfilm.com every single day in full capacity after the past week of Fantastic Fest. But also, if you want to hear me complain and moan about moving, you can follow me at Jacob S. Hall on Twitter.
You can find more of my work at slashfilm and on slashfilm.com. Slashfilm Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and television and deeper dives into the great features from slashfilm.com. You can subscribe to Slashfilm Daily on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. We are very much still experimenting with this podcast, so send us an email, peter@slashfilm.com. It can be a question for the mailbag, or it could just be some feedback. If you love the show, though, please go to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review. That helps us out a lot, and spread the word. Tell your friends, tweet about this, Facebook about it. Help us out, and we can always use more listeners. And as always, thank you for listening.